silent. They are a facade, a front wall of a chamber, a room. Behind there is a space for several thousand other pipes that make up the voice of the instrument. Tonight's Counts Dracula are Jim Houston and Michael Gaffney, both graduates of Baltimore's Peabody Conservatory. Come enjoy the music, and we welcome you.
Does anybody know why The Raven is the most popular poem by Edgar Allan Poe? Anybody?
There's a bunch of damn ravens around here.
No, because if the Annabelle Lees had won the Super Bowl, that sounds pretty weird, don't you think? I'm just saying. And plus it doesn't fit that well in a jersey.
That's true. Excuse me. Oh, they backside. Yeah, well that was... This is Frank.
Make room, take your picture and make room. Now, you can't all want my picture, come on. Edgar Allan Poe is buried here. He is buried here with his wife. He is buried here with his mother-in-law. He is buried here with his cousin. He is buried here with his aunt. How many people are buried here?
3.
As the two Mr. Prematures over there have already told you, the answer is 3. 3 people are buried here because Edgar Allan Poe...
She told us already.
She's still alive.
So she told us. She pirated it.
Edgar Allan Poe married his cousin when she was just about 13, and his mother-in-law was his aunt as well. So,
How old was he when he married the 13-year-old?
questions. I'm going to say 20s. Is that good?
Close enough.
So this monument is Poe's actually third monument. His first monument, you have to remember, he was buried en route to somewhere north, whether it was Boston, New York, whatever. So when he died here, it was sudden, unexpected. He didn't have a lot of people here, and he certainly didn't have a lot of money because he was traveling. So when he died, he was buried in the Poe plot over there, and he had a simple marble marker to mark his mortal remains. A few years after that, friends and family got together. They saw that Edgar Allan Poe, this great poet, this great writer, only had a small marble marker to mark his place, and they decided they wanted to give him something, more appropriate. So they gathered their money. They had a really beautiful headstone put together, and unfortunately it had an accident. Does anyone know where Camden Yards is? Home of the world famous Baltimore Orioles. Camden Yards used to be an actual train station. I didn't know that. Apparently it was, because that's where they kept Poe's second monument. And while it was in storage there, a train derailed, hit it, broke into a million little pieces, and it was lost. So again, for years, Edgar Allan Poe was stuck with only a simple marble marker to mark his mortal remains. God, that's a tongue twister. I gotta think of a better way to say that. That is, until a woman by the name of Sarah Sigourney Rice, who was a teacher of locution at Western High School in Baltimore, Maryland, she started a program called Pennies for Poe. The gist of that program, she'd send students around. They would go door to door, knocking on doors, collecting pennies to get Edgar Allan Poe a proper monument. The program was wildly successful, and as a result of that and the generosity of a few other benefactors, they bought this monument you see here today. Any questions?
When the First Presbyterian Church of Baltimore purchased a little over an acre of property from Lieutenant Colonel John Eager Howard for £150. The Catacombs were created in 1851 when they started construction on the church. Having decided at this late date that they wanted to build a church on this property, they had a problem. The cemetery had been broken into lots. People were already buried here. Vaults had been built. There was no large open space for a building of this size. Their solution, rather ingeniously, was to build a church on top of the existing cemetery. Now, having done this, they had a little bit of an issue because many people did not like the idea that their loved ones were going to spend eternity buried in the basement of a church. So they made two compromises. One, they slightly widened the proportions of the foundation so that it straddled the space between lots. No one is actually buried directly under the wall. And secondly, they raised the foundation and created these large archways so that people could get underneath easily enough and tend to the vaults or the graves of their family members. The doors opened in 1852. It remained an active congregation until December of 1977, when they held their final service, which was a Christmas service. They closed the doors, they turned the keys over to the Westminster Preservation Trust, and that is now the entity that is responsible for the building and the grounds. They do rent out Westminster Hall for various events if anyone is interested. As you go in, be very careful. The ground is uneven, the ceiling is quite low, we don't want to lose anyone. You go all the way to the back, and to the left there's a slight dog leg where you can go back into an area they call Elizabeth's room for someone who's buried there. And you can look inside one of the vaults. It is empty, but you can see how they are constructed, which is very interesting. They're very, very deep. Then you'll come back, and assuming you survive your visit, you'll exit at the back of the building. And behind the church we have a variety of entertainment. Our own General John Stricker will regale you with tales of his exploits during the War of 1812. And one of our favorite guests, Frank the Body Snatcher, is visiting us this evening, and he is doing tricks of the trade in case anyone is looking for a new job. I understand he's looking for a hand. So you may go in, be very careful. Happy Halloween. If you have any questions now or later, feel free to ask.
Let's see. There's the power.
And you can see headstones and footstones of the two graves, and a stone down back here which we think may be the grave stone of a child. And the other two stones are left over from construction of the church. So let everybody have a chance to look into the crypt and then explore the rest of the catacombs. Thank you for coming. We did go back in.
Now this is when they used to open all the time until the family comes in. Yeah, there actually are bones in there.
Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no! It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say, I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with all these suppositions, but he had found them all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. What had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still they chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder and louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no. They heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder! 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 Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here! Here! It is the beating of his hideous eyes!